let us listen to the welcome message of our very own Dole 11 Regional Director and Chairperson of the Regional Tripartite Peace Council, RD Ofelia V. Domingo. Let's give her our virtual applause. RD, you are muted po.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is the day for our considering as our fourth quarter meeting, at the same time the ITC Summit, which I've been telling you all about in all our ITC meetings, and it's now realized that we are now here together, for this occasion. This is the first virtual summit for RO11, and our theme is mental health awareness, key to stable workplace relationship amidst the pandemic. Despite the pandemic, we are here together, hindi nadadampen yung spirit natin to preserve and to further enhance our relationship, both labor, management, and government. Tripartism is very important in our economy, important in our relationships, between labor, management, and government. So today's ITC Summit brings all of us together, 144 participants to this summit, and we are not, as I said, dampened by this pandemic, because we need to have a legacy to give to we have to have a legacy. The legacy is for us to show our care for each other, to show that amidst the pandemic, we are one in making this region a peaceful and peaceful region. So we have here, God says that He cares for us. And when we trust God, He trusts and blesses us over and over. So let us continue to trust God that He cares for all of us. In fact, we're supposed to have problem with regards to the brownout that will happen. But in God's grace, with God's grace, we're able to request our friend from the Davao Light na wag na muna tayong wag muna mag-brown out dito sa area natin because we are having this ITC Summit. Ano po ang ating objective po ng IT Summit? As I said, it's a way of bringing us all together to be united in one purpose, and that is to ensure that our relationship is preserved, that we'll have a peaceful relations between labor management and government. We'll be able to learn, we know that this pandemic has caused us so much fears, anxiety, and it affects our lives so much. So that's why we need, not only, we have been taught about, are we very careful? I mean, the government has been telling us to follow strict health protocols. That is physical. But it does not, but there's one area in health and safety that we also have to consider, and that is our mental health. So mental health does not mean that sira-sira ulo, or mental health does not mean that we have problems with regards to kailangan natin pumunta sa psychologist. In our everyday life, we suffer fears, anxiety, depression. So we would like to share with you some of the tips, or how can we preserve the relationship in the workplace by being aware of mental health issues. So, but most important is we lift ourselves to God. Let our fears be changed to faith, our worries change to worship. So let's continue with this and as we continue with this celebration of the Christmas, no? Kasi malapit na po ang Christmas, and I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope you will still attend until the end of this summit, as we're going to recognize also our partners, private companies, and the employers, and of course the workers. No, we will give recognition for your support and cooperation in our DOLE programs and services. No, and we're happy that no less than the Secretary of Labor and Employment will be our keynote speaker in a few minutes from now. And of course, we're happy that Director Dr. Miriam Pue is the chairperson of the PRC Board of Psychology, will be here to discuss building a mental health workplace in the VUCA world. And of course, our former secretary, my mentor, one of my mentors in the DOLE, Secretary Maria Nieves Confessor, will be talking about, discussing about navigating to a VUCA world, responses to strengthen labor and management relation in the workplace. Actually, I've known this VUCA world since 2013. When Secretary Nieves Confessor became our speaker in one of the leadership training that we had. So I hope you'll stay and let's enjoy kahit po virtual lang tayo. Please post anything that you want to share in the group chat, no? In the chat room. Let's all be let's be open, and I hope you will have take active participation in the open forum later. And as a token, despite our distance, despite this is virtual, our token will be delivered in your respective offices after today. No, so rest assured that it will be delivered to your respective offices. Please enjoy our virtual summit. I hope you learn from this virtual summit. Let's entrust our cares to God, and let's celebrate this season of Christmas by giving ourselves, giving our time, giving what we have, share what we have to all the people that needs our love, affection, and care. So with that, we welcome you all to this Industry Tripartite Summit, and I hope I was able to make clear of why are we here and what's the reason why we are having this ITC Summit. So thank you and good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Ma'am Opel. My predecessor, kung nandyan si Ma'am Miriam, nandyan na ba nandyan na ba? Si Nieves. Ma'am Nieves, nandyan na kayo?
Andyan na yata siya po.
Good morning, Ma'am Nieves. Good morning. Of course, I will still greet Dr. Miriam Pue, the Vice Chair for Labor of the Regional Tripartite Industry Peace Council, Mr. Samuel Cardeño, the Vice Chair for Management, Ms. Rachel Ginan, the respective Labor and Management Vice Chairpersons, the officers and members of the different industry tripartite councils of Davao Region, as well as the TIPCs of Davao City and Davao Occidental, the members of the DOLE Regional Coordination Committee, my colleagues from the different agencies, distinguished guests, resource persons, and my dear fellow workers in the department, ladies and gentlemen, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Mayong buntag sa atong mga kaigalan diya sa Davao. First, allow me to congratulate DOLE Davao Region and the RTIPC for this first regional virtual summit for the industry tripartite councils. This meeting platform forms part of the new normal in the face of the COVID pandemic. We have been fighting COVID for almost a year now, and kahit papano, we are able to slowly contain the havoc that this pandemic has wrought not only to our health, but also our economic and social lives. But this war cannot be won by government alone. The fight for survival is a shared responsibility. We in the labor, the management, and government sectors have to doubly work hand in hand to adapt and overcome the many challenges before us. If you recall, in pre-COVID days, we gave importance to workplace and social relations. We were so fond of spending company together activities, team building, company parties, small group discussions, and other means to connect and build healthy relationship in the workplaces. But those social activities are already things of the past. They are now restricted. Under the new normal, we are restrained to shake hands. We are prohibited from conducting large gatherings, and worse, we are restricted from hugging friends, especially beautiful friends and acquaintances, both old and the new. We have to physically distance ourselves from one another. This changing social milieu is definitely affecting even the mental health of the fun and relationship-loving Filipino worker. It is in this respect, therefore, that this virtual event becomes very relevant as this seeks to address mental health awareness and how excellent workplace relations may be enhanced, and even at times when social activities are constrained. I am truly enthusiastic to know how do we remain connected at the workplace when we are being told to keep distance from each other. Let us carry on, however, with this virtual event productively, and I wish you success in this undertaking. My virtual applause to all of you. Mabuhay po kayo, and more importantly, advance Merry Christmas. Daghang salamat ug maayong buntag.
So, our first speaker for today is a graduate of bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of San Carlos. She also is a holder of Master's of Science degree in counseling from De La Salle University, where she also completed her PhD in counseling psychology with high academic distinction. In pursuit of advanced knowledge in several areas of applied psychology, she has been to other countries, notably the US, Canada, Japan, Scotland, the United Kingdom, France, Switzerland, Australia, among others. At present, she is the chairperson of the Professional Regulatory Board of Psychology and a global master trainer on the Universal Treatment Curriculum for Substance Use Disorder under the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs of the U.S. Department of State and the Colombo Plan Drug Advisory Program. For the past 23 years, she served as psychotherapist and director of psychological service of New Day Recovery Center in Davao City, where she also sits as member of the board of directors. She has also published in several international research and referred journals on concern related to trauma and traumatic stress, SUD treatment, and recovery management, among others. Prior to PRC, she is a professor of Psychology at Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology for 32 years, an HR organization development consultant to big industrial establishment and multinational companies for more than 2 decades, an HR manager of Carhill Philippines and Refractories Corporation of Philippines, and the HR supervisor and trainer director of Iligan Cement Corp. In her early part of her career, she also is a guidance counselor of and faculty of psychology at Xavier University and Lourdes College. So please help me welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Miriam Kwe. Ma'am?
Here. Hello.
Yes. Morning po, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Honorable Silvestre Bello III, Secretary of the Department of Labor and Employment, my great friend, uh, Regional Director Ofelia B. Domingo, CESO 3, Regional Director of Dole 11, and Chairperson of the Regional Tripartite Industrial Peace Council, Mr. Samuel Cardenio, Vice Chairperson for the Labor Sector of the Regional Tripartite Industrial Peace Council, Ms. Rachel Guinan, Vice Chairperson for the Management Sector of the Regional Tripartite Industrial Peace Council, to all the officers of the DOLE who are with us in this webinar today, and of course, all our participants. You know who you are. You are of very much value to the DOLE, and your presence in this seminar, webinar today is indeed highly acknowledged. So it is my sincere hope that this brief discussion on building mental health in the workplace in a VUCA world will at least give valuable information that will be of value to your respective companies and to what you are doing right now. Okay, this presentation is primarily informative and hopefully educational for our own self-efficacy, awareness, and literacy, as needed also for the promotion of mental health and to address stigma related to mental health. Okay. So let me go straight to my discussion. Okay, I thought I would be the second speaker, so I'm very privileged. I am very honored to be with you today. And this beautiful day is all about being mentally healthy and what we can do to strengthen mental health in the workplace. We all have the right to health as a matter of responsibility. Okay, so the slide, can you excuse me, maybe this slide you can okay. So my topic is on a mentally healthy workplace in a VUCA world. Okay, so as mentioned by Director Ophel earlier, I almost actually, like you may have had problems about power. I also have problems about Wi-Fi connection because Globe in our area has been out of service since 10 o'clock last night. And so I cannot use either pre and postpaid. And so I'm using data mobile of Smart now. I hope it can last for the duration of my discussion. Okay, now, so basically, first and foremost, I'd like to point out that we are going through very tough times, okay? So we are confronted with a VUCA world. So what do we mean by this? A world that is highly volatile, very uncertain, giving us insecurity and anxiety, very complex, that multiple key decision factors must have to be considered when we make decisions, okay? and it is very ambiguous. So maybe primarily because of the rapid and unexpected changes. And there are changes, pending changes, known unknowns, aside from the too many unknown unknowns. So I may ask the question now. How do you know about the situation? How exactly do you know? And how well can you predict the results of your actions right now? I'm pretty sure many of you are complaining about stress. While stress can motivate us, stress, too much stress can be a killer in camouflage. It can be a silent killer. So we are going through tough times, okay? We are faced with extraordinary and challenging demands. And right now, we are faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is actually unprecedented. So because of the pandemic, okay, many of us work from home, okay? We may be in quarantine and in isolation, okay? So we need to keep social distance as a matter of health protocol. So with a social distance, many of us also seek distance socializing through the social media. So many communities are on quarantine. So from ECQ to modified ECQ to general ECQ. So transportation has been restricted. That's why our board exams for psychologists scheduled in February is supposed to have been scheduled in February, but many of our takers are requesting for postponement because of travel restrictions. So we are faced with these issues right now, and the potential mental health crisis is very serious and will be with us for some time to come. There are even experts who are saying that it would at least take a minimum of 30 years to address the mental health crisis. So hopefully, okay, we are strong enough to face all these difficult times, to navigate through the crisis and rise above the ashes of this crisis, much like the phoenix, the mythical bird. Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Am I? Do I have control of the slides, please? Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic is challenging the world as never before. So I'd like us to look at this pandemic from the perspective of physical health, the physical health crisis, the economic crisis, and the mental health crisis. Okay, the impact of COVID-19 on mental health is of course complex, diverse, and wide-ranging, affecting all people and societies. But when the pandemic actually hit us, you know, when the COVID-19 disease hit us, the first crisis we had to face was physical health. So we have here in this slide the health blue footprint of the pandemic. So right after we were hit by the COVID-19 disease, we were faced with immediate issues on mortality, death, and morbidity. Okay, so many people died, and while some, hopefully, we are slowly acquiring herd immunity to the coronavirus at this point, but still, the infection rate is still very high. Okay, the number of deaths may have lessened a bit, but infection rate is still going up. It has spiked up and is in fact expected to spike up further still towards Christmas. So with the immediate mortality and morbidity issue, sometime in the early part of March, April, May, and June, we were we had problems with post-recovery issues in many of our intensive care units, so that people who needed to be at ICU were restricted. People with urgent non-COVID conditions, or the ICU was already full of COVID patients. And then the third wave came with the impact on interrupted care of chronic conditions, like many of our friends and family members who may have been suffering from diabetes. Okay, so we are facing difficult times, very challenging times, and we live in this. Um, we live in the midst of a pandemic right now, a pandemic that is impacting not just on our physical health, but also our um, economic life as well. That's why some of us, many of us, are faced with insecurity, considering the possibility of unemployment and lost jobs in the context of reduced workforce, the closure of certain offices and businesses and even industries. So the good thing is that while many businesses might close, new sources of value are likely to emerge. In fact, the DTI will have a summit starting this afternoon on manufacturing, and this is until the 11th. Okay, so we are faced with these issues. So with psychic trauma and burnout in the face of the financial and economic crisis, we are also facing another crisis, and that is the mental health crisis. So overall, we would say that in the first wave, we were confronted with a physical health crisis. Second wave, the economic and financial crisis. And today, the third wave, we are facing the mental health crisis. And it is very unfortunate that governments worldwide are not really prepared to address the mental health crisis. They are, in fact, already too overwhelmed in addressing the physical health crisis. And we do not have enough mental health professionals in the country today to address psychological intervention. We have less than 500 psychiatrists, only barely over 1,000 psychologists, and maybe around 2,000 or more guidance counselors. So basically, we just need to take care of ourselves, and companies as well need to take care of the mental health of their people. So mental health is important because it allows people to develop in many ways: emotionally, mentally, intellectually, and socially. So it benefits the people where they live, where they work, leading to social development and economic growth. That's how important mental health is. So, in the face of all this, we say that the outbreak of the coronavirus brought about unprecedented changes, okay, and disruptions to the way life used to be. So, and this has been very stressful for many of us. Adjustment issues emerged along with public health concerns and actions. Some of us may have managed to navigate through the crisis and get by unscathed or unscarred, but the great majority turned out to be very disturbed and even distressed, and many have even been paralyzed and immobilized. So the pandemic, okay, regardless of uh, the issues brought about by the pandemic also prompted, okay, the demand for mental health initiatives and services. We came up with a mental health law in 2018 to address the very low attention we have given to mental health. But nothing much, except maybe for webinars on mental health. People never took action, okay, until the mental health issue was brought to the limelight by social media because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So, with COVID-19 and the lockdown experience, okay, many people were experiencing these psychological effects. Next slide, please. Stress and anxiety, which includes uncontrollable worries, okay, safety, okay, to say safety of health and self, okay, and then of course somatic complaints and palpitations, hypervigilance, changes in energy and sleeping patterns, panic among those with chronic conditions. So, aside from stress and anxiety, we were also facing issues of aggression. For those of us who are responding to requests for help or calls for help online, we know for a fact that there have been cases of opposition to authorities, okay, home-based violence, physical and sexual abuse, exploitation of children, and even cyber crimes. Okay? So aside from this, depression has been on the rise. Okay? Suicide has been an issue, particularly suicidal ideations. Then many of us were faced with relationship problems. I would say that every day on Zoom sessions, I always have a case of couples in distress. So relationship problems, which include feelings of estrangement, separation, temptations, and many more. Relapse in substance use and abuse, relapse in pre existing mental health conditions like mood disorders, schizophrenia, general anxiety disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, and of course, the worsening of chronic health problems and conditions, especially with interrupted care and restricted medical care. So, COVID-19 and the lockdown experience impacted on many people, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. So, we are now saying that this is actually a pivotal moment in the history of humanity. We are faced with a fundamental schism, okay? A fragmentation between the pre-viral period, before the virus, when when things seemed so predictable, threats, there were threats and were predictable, and so we came up with planned responses. We came up with 5 to 10 year strategic plans on the basis of our successes and failures, and the threats and opportunities provided by the environment. Okay? But things are no longer the same, especially with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We are also faced with the Industrial Revolution, which was already there. Even the fourth IR was already starting to emerge even before the pandemic. But it took the pandemic to actually to silence those who were resistant to new technology, because we had to use technology for contact tracing, for online education, for remote work during the pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, okay, we are faced the post viral period, which many people consider as the new normal. Okay, we say new normal because we're now talking here about unprecedented new reality. So in Cebuano, we say, wala sa atong kasinatian. So everything is new, with total landscape disruption on technology, and of course, technology and way of life, in education, in healthcare. So society is also changing. So the social and economic order have been shaken, and opening new sources of value. So life is no longer the same. It wouldn't help to complain and moan, because it will never, our complaining, our whining will never bring back the past. We have to face a new tomorrow. Okay? And so work is also changing. Next slide, please. Okay, today and in the years to come, the world is actually in a state of flux. Work is constantly reshaped by technological progress. We now talk about smartphones, smart connectivity, like Alexa, Siri, and all that. Okay, people are now empowered, especially with the use of new technologies. So there is a total landscape transformation. Our case files are now digitalized. Okay, so there is now more connectivity. But the irony is that while we are connected to the rest of the world, we cannot even connect anymore with our nearest neighbor, even with family members. So mom talks to the child via texting, even if the child is only next room. Okay, so they're saying that even the judge may even be replaced by the artificial judge. But I would say this will still take a long time, especially in our country. First, because more than 50% of our people do not really have access to technology. Okay, and either we don't have the gadgets or we don't have the connectivity. And then second, We have many of us, especially those on my age, my cohorts, may not even be prepared to adopt new technologies. We need to learn. That's why we need to upskill ourselves, renew ourselves. Okay? So workers should not allow themselves to be left behind. We need to advance our knowledge and upgrade our skills so we can keep up with new technologies. Okay? So, okay, with changes in technology and the COVID-19 pandemic, next slide, please. Uh, we have faced with unprecedented changes and extraordinary challenges with significant impact on work and on the educational landscape. So every country, not just the Philippines, is presently implementing plans and procedures on how to contain the virus, but the infection rate is still rising. Many of us now work remotely from home, but many complain because we could no longer put boundaries between home life and working life. Okay, while working remotely, a child is crying for help with his modular education. Classrooms are closed, and so to sustain and provide quality education despite the lockdown and community quarantine, the new normal means online education, online learning. But then again, how many have the gadgets? How many have the competence to do this? So some of us may be well adjusted to the new norm, but there are still many others left grappling and groping to survive even the most basic of this time. So not everyone has the capacity to go online. Not all have internet connections, as I already mentioned earlier. So what are the mental health challenges today in the face of the crisis and changing technology? So definitely we're talking here about jobs which are threatened. Okay, jobs are threatened and no one expects recovery soon enough. Okay, so people are getting insecure because of the importance of work. Okay, loss of job could mean loss of income, loss of social status, loss of social connections, and even loss of the very important things money can buy. Okay, increase in the symptoms of stress, depression, and anxiety stemming from fear and uncertainty, violation, and loneliness. And so we are faced with the worsening mental health condition, especially, okay, for those who are vulnerable because of pre-existing mental health conditions. The difficulty today of accessing medication and treatment, and the increased need for psychological support. The coronavirus does not discriminate people. We know that, okay? And so the pandemic and subsequent quarantine has actually triggered a complex emotional response, which may be new or even unfamiliar. At the same time, not everyone has access to technology, nor is everyone prepared to work in this era, okay, to fit in with technology. So digital learning on one hand, digital work on one hand, and then the pandemic on the other. How much can we take? So how half of the world, as next slide please, as I mentioned earlier, okay, has no access to the internet. So under the emerging canon of disruptive technology and under the heavy spin of the onrush of progress, we are facing what the Australian economist calls creative destruction, which is actually grim for those who are creatively destroyed. So coping with the crisis is something we can address, but coping with emerging technology is another issue. Okay? So, and there are also issues related to technology, like excessive use, next slide, of social media. Okay? Because we think it is harmless distraction. Okay, so we aside from this, okay, we are afraid of missing out on information, so we spend most of our time on social media, even sacrificing sleep, although we say it's our only way of killing time, because it's the only means we can connect with friends and family and get the information we need. And yet, when we are on social media, there is increased, what we call increased attack surface area. For example, okay, we cannot bring home all our friends, right, and acquaintances. But today, we bring home all of them on our phone. Our acquaintances become acquainted with each other, increasing their connections to everything that we do. So people inform you even if you don't bother or even if you don't need information. So there is prolonged, repeated exposure to information. Ha- That's why it is very difficult to think and act when you communicate in real time because of the complexity of information. And even harder to take things back when you do a wrongdoing. It's very difficult. Okay, words, our words, our actions are immortalized on some remote computer. Aside from all this, next slide, please. We are also confronted with natural disasters and calamities. We just had enough of um, Super Typhoon Ulysses and the typhoon prior to this. And aside from super typhoons, okay, we cannot avoid volcanic eruptions or earthquakes because we are actually, the Philippine archipelago actually occupies um, the western ring of the Pacific. That's why we are actually in what they call the Pacific Ring of Fire, posing real danger to earthquakes. So these natural disasters and calamities further complicate the complexity and problems brought about by the pandemic alongside changing technology. So everything is practically disrupted. So we don't even talk anymore about change management, but disruption management. And in the face of all this, next slide, please, people are suffering. Mental health is at risk. So people complain about anxiety, panic, grief, aggression, obsession, compulsions, hypervigilance, obsessiveness, okay? So people are distressed. We are facing traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even anxiety disorder. So
Okay. We'll trying to contact po si Ma'am Dr. Cuepo, no? Okay.
I'm
Yes
here.
po.
So it's my connection is very unstable po. Okay, so basically mental health, we say, next slide please. We say that mental health is less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and also harder to bear. Harder to bear and more difficult to diagnose because it takes longer to establish the symptoms for mental health issues. Some are often more difficult and not easy to distinguish from problems at work. And mental health problems are usually long lasting, and the risk of relapse is very high, higher than physical health issues. Now let's move on to the workplace. Okay, so we are faced with significant problems in the workplace. Okay, we are faced with significant stress, faced with harmful physical and emotional responses that occur when there is a poor match between job demands and the capabilities, resources, and the needs of the individual worker. Okay, let's admit it. We have been trained many years ago and then educated years ago. At 65, I would say that I finished college more than 45 years ago, and even my doctoral training more than 40 years ago. Okay, so so things have changed. Although in the field of intervention, nothing much has changed. But for those using technology significantly, job demands have changed. And so we need to match, okay, the emerging job demands, changing job demands, and the capabilities of the worker, his resources, okay? So, and his very own needs. So if these do not match, okay, he experiences distress. That is the emotional and physical strain caused by our response to the pressures of the outside world. Now, stress, however, cannot really be avoided because it is part of everyday situations. It is part of life, okay? And it has the potential to upset our well-being. So instead of avoiding stress, we need to learn how to manage stress. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned earlier, stress can be a silent killer. A little stress can give us a competitive edge, definitely. But too much stress can have harmful consequences like insomnia, sleeping difficulties, headaches, and in the most severe cases, a heart attack or a stroke or even an urge to commit suicide. Okay, so this next slide, please. This is the stress performance connection. So if you look at the vertical line, we have performance from low to high. On the horizontal plane, we have low to high stress. Okay, so with minimal stress, people tend to be inactive. I'd rather sleep. Kaya ko naman yan. Mamaya ko na yan gagawin. So a little stress can make us alert. Okay, moderate stress can optimize performance, but when stress is too much, we run the risk of exhaustion, especially with anxiety and disorganized thinking. So that when stress is too much, too high, we may suffer from burnout or exhaustion, which can even be a permanent condition. That's why we need to manage stress and keep it at optimal levels so as to optimize performance. Now, when we talk about why are our employees stressed, so these are some of the psychological distress experienced by many of our workers. One, next slide please, is excessive workload, okay, or unpleasant tasks, things we don't normally like doing, but we can't find any other job. Lack of participation and control, okay? So meaning we do not hold positions of responsibility. We're not managers. So many of us complain from lack of participation and control over important resources in the work situation. Many of us find our jobs monotonous, or there may be those faced with role ambiguity or conflict. Some complain about lack of recognition at work. Trabaho ng trabaho, wala namang recognition because we are simply expected to do the job. Many perceive inequality. How come I work harder and I do my job worth is actually of higher value than my seatmate, but this person is receiving more than I am. Poor interpersonal relationships at work can add to the stress. Poor working conditions. That's why we normally address or attach the mental health program of institutions to the safety program of institutions as well. So poor working conditions can definitely impact on our mental health alongside poor leadership, unsupportive supervisors, okay, very difficult managers, and communication problems, along with the conflicting demands of work and home. Okay, so sometimes we say, we tell our children, please try to understand, mom has to work, so she can send you to school. And then children would complain, how come you cannot even help me with online education? Before, you can't even find time for PTA meeting. So mom, what is it you're trying to tell me? And you said you are working, okay, to ensure that I have good education, and you're not even there to help me with my education. So this is causing distress among many of our workers. And of course, there are many more. Next slide, please. So overwork leads to unhealthy employees, just as underwork can be very disturbing to very competent employees. And so there is an ill matching of job requirements and skill sets. There could be lack of training and to the new job demands. And so we have employees who are actually overstressed and more likely to get sick with high, that's why absenteeism and sick leaves are on the rise. Okay, stressed out workers typically have higher turnover rates. Okay, they transfer from one company to the other, they don't know what to do, than healthy workers. And employees can only work at unhealthy levels. So if we feel unhealthy, we find our jobs unhealthy, please realize that we can only work for so long before we get completely disenfranchised and disengaged or unmotivated and leave the organization, or worse, quit on our jobs, okay, just because we still need the pay, but we are not responsive anymore to what is needed. And this leads to higher costs associated with recruitment and turnover. Now, please realize as well that employees who develop negative feelings towards the workplace can quickly influence co-workers and bring down the satisfaction levels of everyone around them. So that is the problem. That's why it is our responsibility, those of us in leadership positions, to manage mental health in the workplace. or put up at least a mental health program in the pursuit of a mentally healthy workplace. So encouraging and assisting employees to maintain a healthy work-life balance is vital to their health and that of the organization. So closely interwoven with stress is the issue of burnout. Okay, burnout, next slide please, is not a diagnosable mental health condition. It is a psychological phenomenon that is identified and described with research literature on occupational stress. It is a syndrome of emotional exhaustion. Talagang ano na, parang di na kaya, you are actually too weak to respond to the demands of the job anymore. So you get disengaged, okay? So it is distinguished from occupational stress in that it is more specific. Like occupational stress is more specific in contrast to burnout, which is a sense of disengagement at work. Okay. Now, with stress and burnout, the research is replete with evidence pointing out, next slide please, that there is a rise in the use of alcohol, substances, and other drugs. So there is now a rise in alcohol use and dependence. The relationship between stress and alcohol dependence is very well documented. And work stress, okay, has been found to by research that work stress suggests on work stress that alcohol use to manage stress and sadness is actually notably high. Okay, to experience psychological numbness, but right after when the intoxication is over, we are back to square one. So to survive in the workplace and succeed in this VUCA world, can we go fast on the slides, please? So, for the next speaker, we must learn to manage our stresses most effectively. And to manage our stresses, we need to understand, have a clear understanding of the phenomenon that is to be managed. So stress has something to do with our fight or flight response. Either we confront the problem, fight it out, or fly away and dismiss the problem. But the distress, the tension, the feeling of being under pressure, the anxiety, the agitation, frustration will never go away unless we confront the stress experience. Next slide, please. So stress is a condition of strain on our thought processes, our emotions, and physical condition. So stress starts with our perception of environmental events. So it starts with cognition. Our perception of stress will trigger feelings of anxiety. It will upset us, causing tension within the body system. And it is this tension that give rise to physical and behavioral manifestations. Next slide. So therefore, we say that when we talk about distress, certainly we should be aware of its adverse effects. Okay, all disease of the body actually proceed from the mind or the soul, according to Plato. That's why, according to the World Health Organization now, there is no health without mental health, because stress and poor mental health actually determines the point at which we find ourselves sliding down the slope from health to distress, to illness and disease. That's the conclusion, that stress triggers the illness, or illness and disease are a consequence of our failure to adapt effectively to stress, or our failure to manage stress. Okay, now this is the stress progression. So we're confronted with different life conditions. Next slide, please. Okay, so and from these life situations, we actually perceive as either pleasant or unpleasant. Okay, our perceptions of this life situation will determine the stress capacity and stress load, which will arouse our emotions. Emotional arousal will signal the physiological responses, which can either be chronic negative consequences or acute. Okay, so if you look at the slide, okay, it starts with perception. So the mind has the remarkable ability to induce stress and to overcome stress by choice. Okay, so this is actually the pathway. Next slide, please. From stress to illness. Okay, with our negative emotional stress, we either have unhealthy behavior patterns. Next slide, please. And the stress hormones. Okay, that is cortisol. Too much stress hormones, okay, can actually weaken the immune system, just as unhealthy behaviors. So once the immune system is weakened, we are vulnerable to illness. And stress has been found to be associated not only with individual illness, but also to many costly organizational symptoms. Now, next slide. So when we talk about the factors that actually impact on stress, okay, we consider, okay, issues in the work environment that trigger stress. Next slide, please. And then alongside the duration of the stress experience, the intensity of the stress experience, its frequency. Okay, and so we talk about the FID rating: duration, in frequency, intensity, and duration of the stress experience, plus other comorbidities, other disorders within the person, his personality, and familiarity with the event. But of course, very important as well is our support system. So let's try to build a strong support system within the organization. Okay, so these are some of the stress warning signs and symptoms. Next slide, please. So these warning signs and symptoms are experienced at 4 levels. The cognitive symptoms, which include memory problems, poor judgment, difficulty getting focused, which practically impact on decision making. The emotional symptoms, which include moodiness, agitation, irritability, which impact on our relationships. Physical symptoms like diarrhea or constipation, because tension builds up in the stomach. Okay, even the loss of sex drive on young people. Okay, so frequent colds, so which makes us vulnerable to infection and illness. And of course, the behavioral symptoms like too much eating or tension eating, sleeping little or too much, okay, procrastination, using alcohol, nervous habits, okay. So all this impact on our performance. Now, when stress becomes unhealthy, next slide, when we feel unworthy, when we are agitated and restless, when we entertain suicidal thoughts and ideations, when we feel sad and hopeless, isolated, tearful, when we cannot focus and or concentrate, when we have lost motivation and interest in things we normally enjoy, when energy is depleted, when we feel drained and fatigued, okay, and we feel all the body aches, okay, and non-performance at work, what do? Wash it clean. Okay, look at the red. That's the acronym. So wash it clean. How do we wash it clean? Learn to manage the stress experience. Remember, next slide, please, that stress has to be managed simply because it is the precursor, the beginning of poor mental health and mental health problems and issues like anxiety and depression. So when stress is too much, we are alerted. We are alerted and we get over engaged until the point of fatigue and exhaustion. And when that happens, we go down the slope to depression and disengagement. That's why stress has to be managed right from the very start. So, in the next slide, we are trying to distinguish stress from anxiety or depression. So, when we talk about stress in the context of mental and emotional strain, anxiety to worries and apprehension, and depression to as a serious mood disorder. It's not just ordinary sadness. It is characterized by a persistent pattern of sadness. And when we talk about anxiety, we have what we term as normal anxiety on one hand to clinical anxiety on the opposite end. When the worry, the nervousness is excessive and persistent. Okay. Now, but of course, there are many healthy ways of coping to stress. So we can distract ourselves by watching Netflix. Okay. We can seek for cathartic release. Next slide. When we express our struggles to a friend, or we try to redefine the situation in ways that are less stressful, when we when we develop a plan of action based on a certain goal or direction, and when things cannot be helped, we need to accept. That's why we say, Lord, help me to accept things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, we seek social support, get help when needed. Okay, please realize that not all your friends may be equipped or trained to respond. So don't be discouraged when they don't know how. Seek professional help when it is too much. And when we can also turn to our faith, to an emotionally healthy spirituality when the problem is beyond our capabilities. But more importantly is proactive coping, meaning we undertake measures in advance to prevent the stress experience. So that's now how do we differ? What is the difference between coping and stress management? Coping with stress. Stress management is actually all about self-management. It goes beyond coping, okay, to adaptation, okay, and it has to do with self-medication, okay, taking responsibility of our personal life, our personal problems, concerns, and stress experiences in an adaptive and productive way. So this is a mentally healthy way of addressing the stress experience. And this is what stress management is all about. Now, stress management can be undertaken, next slide, at two distinct different levels. We have what we call as relaxation and physiologic control um, to reduce the state of tension. okay, for us to be able to think well about our problems. So stress can be managed through relaxation and physiological control techniques, and through cognitive strategies, okay, disciplining the mind, okay. Now, what is workplace mental health? Next slide, please. Now, living with mental illness not only means making the effort to manage it personally, but also finding ways to cope with how it can affect those who are in our lives, the people we work with or the people we live with. So many of us do not find the support we are seeking in the workplace. And in many cases, may even stop working due to the impact of stigma. That need not happen. That's why part of our responsibility when we talk about mental health care is advocacy, promoting mental health and addressing issues related to stigma. Okay, so let's take care instead of discriminating those of us who are suffering from poor mental health. Now, these are some of the mental health issues in the workplace. Okay? Issue number one is that these are the guidelines. Mental disorders are actually the leading cause of disability. Next slide. This includes stress, anxiety, and depression, substance use disorder, okay, and substance use disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Mental health problems have become a major leading cause of absenteeism from work. Please realize this: staff turnover and early retirement, poor performance and productivity losses, sick leaves, increase in error rates at work, poor decision making, proneness to accidents, loss of motivation and commitment, tension and conflict between employees, stress related physical conditions, and low resistance to infection. Okay, that's why, okay, mental health is important. The workplace is a predominant domain in a person's working life and an ever increasing panorama to which we must have to adapt. So nothing is more stabilizing than a secure and satisfying work and a mentally healthy workplace. So promoting mental health in the workplace is, however, a combined effort of employers, managers, and employees to improve the health and well-being of everyone at work. So employers nonetheless have a role to play in managing mental health at work and in strengthening positive mentality. So aside from mental health disorders as the leading cause of disability and mental health problems as the leading cause for many of and practically almost all of the issues at work, mental health, third issue is that mental health disorders, next slide, affect individuals and their employment much beyond economic issues. People with mental disorders suffer from stigmatization, social exclusion, and barriers in obtaining equal opportunities at all levels of life. The VUCA world and its impact on job markets are likely to complicate problems in employment and the quality of life people with mental health issues. So job loss and risk of unemployment means loss of income, loss of status, loss of social contact, and social withdrawal, which is associated with the increased rate of harmful stress, anxiety and depression, psychotic disorders, and even premature death from suicide. That's why we really need to address mental health. And what are some of the manifestations of health issues in the workplace? So people complain about being sick, being tired. So they dread going to work. Okay, they cannot sleep, they worry and are anxious. Okay, so anxiety, time management, fear is also very rampant, a rampant complaint. Now, what is mental health? Next slide, please. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her abilities to cope with the normal stresses of life. It has to do with our ability, regardless of life's difficulties. Mental health has to do with our capacity to develop ourselves, work productively and fruitfully, connect with others, and build wholesome relationships, get involved with community life and its activities. So mental health is a condition, okay, that impacts on each and every one of us. It can be a permanent condition. It is not a permanent condition, however, okay, as we will learn later. And it can even get better or even worse. Now, when we speak of mental health, however, we talk about the interplay, next slide, the interplay of various causative factors, genetics, environment, and the psychological drivers within each and every one of us. It involves 8 dimensions, which includes emotional wellness, financial wellness, okay, social wellness, occupational wellness, and all these dimensions are interwoven. That's why any problem in any of these dimensions can affect the whole man. Okay, so it is the interplay of several factors. Next slide, please. Now, let me just focus on the three important key messages. Next slide, on mental health. There is no health without mental health. Studies already suggest that the link between physical illness and mental health, the fact that it occurs together. Cancer has been associated with chronic anger and anxiety. Okay. Depression has been associated with heart disease and chronic stress with diabetes. So one state of mental health can influence the onset or course of physical and mental illness. Second message, he who is healthy is happy. According to John Locke, a sound mind in a sound body is a full description of a happy state in the world. So he who has both has little to ask for. Health and happiness, therefore, can be equated to a sound mind and a sound body. So when people are mentally healthy, when employees are happy, we are very likely to have a happy workplace. So we need to help each other find happiness. If all of us are seeking happiness, each and every one of us seek happiness, we will never find happiness. That's why we need to help each other to become happy, because ultimately in the end it would mean happiness for all of us. Third message, the wealth of a business depends on the health of the workers. So mental health is of paramount importance to productivity, and that a mentally healthy workplace will definitely benefit all workers, increase productivity, that is productivity for the company, and contribute to the well-being of society and the community at large. So what is, so first message, no health without mental health. Okay. Second, happy employees could mean a happy workplace. And third, the wealth of a business, the health of an organization depends on the health of its employees and its workers. There wouldn't have been complaints if people are mentally healthy. Okay. So the poorer the mental health condition, the more you will hear about whining and complaining in the organization. So what are mental health problems? What is the difference between a mental health problem and a mental disorder? So mental health problems have similar symptoms to that of a mental disorder, but they are not severe enough to be diagnosed as a mental disorder. Now, we have what we term as, we have the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders that defines the criteria for diagnosis. And we also have the international, we have the ICD-10, the International Classification of Diseases, to further describe the different mental health disorders. So basically, a mental disorder has something to do with mental illness. Next slide. Which is a serious disturbance, next slide please, in thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, severe enough to affect day-to-day functioning. So impairment is a significant criterion for the diagnosis of mental illness. Impairment in work, impairment in social life, impairment in relationships like marriage, or impairment um, in other areas, important areas of life. So while there is no demarcation line between health and illness, we have this continuum of people, so next, who are healthy to reacting. So people who are normally functioning are considered healthy. We have normal mood fluctuations, normal sleeping patterns. And then, but when we are in pain, when we are scarred, when we are broken, we may suffer from common and reversible distress. So we say the ego is now reacting. The person is impatient, irritable, nervous. Okay, he is affected by intrusive thoughts. Now, but when he is seriously injured, there could be significant impairment already. So the person suffers from chronic lingering anger, persistent anger, anxiety, feelings of worthlessness, decreased performance, okay? Significantly disturbed sleeping patterns. And of course, when this is not addressed, you may progress into a clinical disorder that could be serious and persistent functional impairment. So before that happens, take care of yourselves. Okay, next slide, please. Take care of the self and find or provide social support. So this is important to the green and yellow zone. But when people are injured and helped, they need professional care. At the point of injury, professional care and self-care along with social support may be important. But when a person is ill, he may now delegate the responsibility of care from self to a professional. So don't wait for that to happen. Let's take care of ourselves. Now, next slide, please. Work is good for mental health. Good is very important. Work is very important because unemployment has been recognized to have significant effects on health and psychological well-being, as already discussed. But even if you have work, a negative work environment can also lead to physical and mental health problems. So what are the warning signs of poor mental health? Next slide, please. So an increase in unexplained absences or sick leave, poor performance, poor timekeeping, increased use of alcohol, drugs, cigarette, and caffeine, frequent headaches and backaches, withdrawal from social contact. You don't want to relate with other people anymore. Poor judgment, indecision that is critical to your work, constant fatigue or low energy, unusual display of emotions. Working slowly, next slide please, working slowly, missing deadlines, difficulty gaining focus, attention, or concentration, appearing numb or emotionless, withdrawal from work activity, in some cases overworking to avoid stressful situations, forgetting directives. So if you have memory lapses, okay, this is a symptom, having difficulty with changes in routine. So let's try to look into ourselves and seek help when it is necessary. Now, when we talk about mental health, we have what we call as protective factors. Next slide, please. This will help us protect our mental health. And this includes a healthy sense of self and spirituality, a secure and stable family life, a sense of belonging, skills in problem solving, cultural and religious beliefs, faith in God, positive work climate with opportunities for success, economic security, physical health, access to treatment. These are what are the protective factors, meaning this will protect us from being psychologically harmed. Now, what are the risk factors which make us vulnerable to poor mental health? Next slide, we have individual and organizational factors. Individual factors include poor self-esteem, poor coping skills, childhood abuse, unemployment, relationship issues and problems. Okay, terminal illness, family history. Organizational factors include poor organization of work, context of work, content of work, the role conflicts, feelings of inadequacy, poor relationships, bullying. These are risk factors. Now, there are many effective ways, actually, next slide, an organization can take to promote mental health in the workplace. So this includes, okay, to establish a healthy workplace, we need health and healthy lifestyle practices, a workplace culture and supportive environment, physical environment and a healthy physical environment, and occupational stress and safety. However, when we talk about preventing and managing stress or mental health, we have to look at this from three different levels. At the primary level, okay, the organization can do something about it. But at the secondary level, this is now the individual's responsibility because the organization cannot address all your issues. You have to seek out your own counseling and training to meet the demands of work and day-to-day life. Now, even you have done everything and there is further deterioration of health, this is now at the third level, which would require treatment or therapy, rehabilitation. That's why part of the mental health program may include return to work policy. So people will be encouraged to address their mental health problems. Okay, so what and how can we do better in a nourishing new world? Next slide, please. This will be just 2 more slides. Full implementation of the mental health law with a focal person at the national and local level. Okay, so we hope to have to establish a mentally healthy workplace as required under Section 25 of RA 1136. Okay. Build and strengthen the information technology infrastructure, the highway for wider reach. Provision of services requires access to the internet. Without the internet, we could have had this. Good and stable connection, strong signals. Train people on the use of technology, that is on device and application, to strengthen their relevance and employability. That's part of empowerment. Help people learn to be resilient, to thrive in the midst of adversity, to manage the landscape of disruption and adapt to the demands of Industry 4.0. Ensure convergence and synergy in mental health services and psychological services delivery through a multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral and all systems approach. And then plan, whether you are in the labor sector or the management sector, plan steps ahead. Be smart. Okay, smart now has a new meaning. So it has, your plans must be strategic, thoroughly meditated. It has to be ambitious, relevant, and technology-based. Not just time-bound, but technology-based, because we are now faced with technology. So to end this presentation, let me point out that the coronavirus does not discriminate people. All of us are potential victims. That's why we need to follow health protocols. Technology, on the other hand, changes our lifestyle. It has shaken the social order. So therefore, on top of this are natural calamities. We should therefore learn to navigate through the storm and rise above the ashes of crisis. Mentally healthy people have the privilege of turning the crisis into productivity. So we cannot just save ourselves. We need to help each other and ensure that the corporate ship stays afloat and reaches ashore. Gone were the days when labor unions protect us, but we all need to work together to protect the business, because once the business goes down, we all go down. So let's help each other. So, and let's all work together. Employers, managers, and employees, let's help each other, promote mental health in the workplace, and build a mentally healthy workplace. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, yes. So let me briefly introduce our second speaker for today. So our second speaker is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in Literary Studies at Maryknoll College. She is also a Master in Business Administration from Ateneo de Manila University, Graduate School of Business, and a holder of Masters in Public Policy from Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. At present, he is currently an adjunct faculty of the Asian Institute of Management, doing research and training for the Sulik School of Development Management, as well as the Business and Executive Education and Entrepreneurship Schools. She was executive director of the AIM Team Energy Center for Bridging Societal Divides, a program director of the Mindanao Bridging Leadership Program, and a member of the team of UNDP project for capability building for the BARM cabinet. In the public service, she is the first Secretary of Labor and Employment in 1991, serving the Aquino and Ramos administration. She is also the presidential advisor of President Ramos on human resource development and international labor affairs, and an expert advisor to the Congressional Committee on Labor and Employment on the review of Labor Code of the Philippines after the cabinet. In the global arena, she is the first Filipino to be elected as chairperson of the tripartite governing body of the International Labor Organization, a highest policy making body of the organization, bringing not only the Philippine voice, but also the Asian voice into shaping of labor and social policy. A chairperson of the six-member tripartite panel of ILO Declaration Expert Advisors to the ILO and its governing body in the conduct of annual reviews of progress made on national, regional, and sectoral basis on the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles. She is recognized as Gawad Maestra Award from the Philippine Society for Training and Development, and in 2017, she is one of the most influential Filipino women in the world. This recognition is recognized for Filipino women who are influencing the face of leadership in the global workplace. She received excellent service in the government, including the 10 Outstanding Women in the Nation service and a presidential award for excellent public service. So please help me welcome to discuss with us the navigation through a VUCA world response to strengthen labor and management in the workplace, Professor Maria Nieves, our confessor. Ma'am?
Yeah, I gotcha. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the invitation. And can I just have, yes, Rafael Alialda just sent a note in the chat box. He was my student. So thank you so much as well, because I think he is a good person to have in this difficult age. Melanie, can I just have 3 minutes, and maybe for all the others, take a leak, multi-break. So I just set up the sharing of screen. All right.
Sure,
So
ma'am.
we can just have a break of about 3 to 5 minutes. Let me just set up the share screen.
Noted po, ma'am. So, baka po gusto niyo po mag-CR or kung ano po, so pwede po tayo mag-break. We'll wait po kay Professor Confessor. So, so I do hope po na nakasubmit na po tayo ng attendance sheets natin. So later we'll be posting po our evaluation form naman po.
Yeah. Mel, set up now for on the fourth slide yung polling.
Yes.
I'll be the one to do it, or your team?
I'll be the one to set the poll po.
Okay, that's all right. And then we'll have immediate feedback, no? When they respond, no?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks. Mel, I'm going to skip some of the slides. Mel, can I just check with you? I'm on a share screen already.
Yes, ma'am.
On?
Yes po.
Okay, thanks. So can I start now?
Sure, ma'am.
All right. Go. All right. Go ahead, Mel.
Okay po, I'll check on the participants. Please type 1 po kung ready na po tayong makinig sa ating second speaker. Okay, yes ma'am, ready na po sila. Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I was told that I'm going to talk about navigating through a VUCA world, responses to strengthen labor and management. And already the title itself says that you need to adjust to the VUCA world already because it's upon us. And I appreciated Dr. Quest's call. Really, what it's looking forward to is that there's a lot of um, stress now that's not been generated before. So let me stress you some more. All right. So I thought I'd welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Director Ophel. Ophel and I date back to so many years ago during my years at the Department of Labor. I worked for 20 years, never imagined I would land in government, but I always felt that part of the reason why I stayed in government what was that I just had really good colleagues and mentors. And in a sense, I'd like to welcome you because I suspect that up to today, we would have a good, resilient department in labor and employment. It's a very stressful area to be in. However, the different kinds of relationships or the relationship structure inside the department has helped us a lot. I also wanted to take this list because I was studying, and thank you, Mel, for giving me all the data. I was asking Mel, can you please let me walk through what's happening? And she sent me data, but I also noted that you do have several industry tripartite councils already, and those industry tripartite councils were severely affected by the pandemic and what we call the VUCA world. And Director Ophel is correct. In 2013, when she was in another region in Mindanao, she did ask us to do succession planning. And we had to get everybody to think of the notion that the 21st century is really the VUCA world. And Dr. Kwe had described it very well. So when I look at the industry, I think you should be bothered by this. However, yeah, this is nice because I got the invitation from Mel. And the reason for this is let me All right, I'm now unmuted. Okay, is that the invitation said, as part of Dole's mission in protecting workers and in maintaining industrial peace through tripartism, my God, I wish the Dole would rewrite that mission already. In the last 20 years, yeah, even 20 years ago, we have already started to tell the country and the world that yes, there is industrial peace, but industrial peace does not cover 80 to 90% of this economy. Also, tripartism talks of three parties. I'm sorry, but the message for today is that pandemic and the VUCA world says that the parties are going to be multi-parties, and the sooner that we get them on board, the better. So the invitation says also, this activity aims to create a healthy workplace. Yes, and Dr. Kwe really slugs that out, that a healthy workplace is also a happy workplace that can be described as one where workers and managers. This is where our language has to change. In the 20th century, we talked of workers and managers. Today, I just sent out a note to Director Ophel because she was telling me that she now holds regular meetings with the HR directors. And my reaction was great. Let's hope you do that consistently and faster. But could you kindly talk to the employers and the owners? Because your HR managers will need the support of those employers. And in many cases, when the finance manager speaks, the HR manager keeps quiet. So the advocacy will have to be a little more. The ecosystem is now different. to actively contribute to the working environment by promoting, etc., etc. So let me now ask you some questions. Mela, I thought I was going to be in control of my slides. No, it's not just that. And it's not working. Because somebody, please, there's supposed to be a box on the right-hand column. So I don't know why it's not there. Okay, I'm going to use not the slideshow. All right. Mela, can you tell your team to just handle that? Huh? So the question I would ask based on that simple letter is this. What is the workplace today? There's remote work. So now we will have to redefine workplace. Because remember, the labor code was based on a 9 to 5 work shift. So the notions of overtime and all are based on a recognition of 9 to 5. And therefore, what is the post-COVID future? And that to me is going to be a major source of conflict, is when we try to apply our labor code. And I notice the NLRC persons are here. I notice also the adjudication systems are here in your summit. My question to them is, how are you going to handle this? The laws that you are using and the regulations do not belong to the new workplace. The second question I ask is, given this, who is responsible for keeping the workplace healthy? Just workers and managers? The owners, aren't they? Supply chain owners. Many of the firms belong to bigger global supply chains, and they're the ones who dictate. Government, my God, the government, has lost and is losing and will lose its control. And then the third question I ask is, in the post-COVID world, with the disruption of the supply chains, including bananas are part of a huge chain, and you're not in control. Okay, who is responsible for that healthy workplace? Then the last question I have is this, and I like the industry councils. Can the TIPSIs help transform its own role and the roles to be played by them? So here we go. Okay, ayan. I'm sorry, but who is manning my slides? Because I'm trying very hard to control it so that it would go very fast. Because there is, Mel, I can't control my slide, please.
Yes, ma'am. I'll stop share this, ma'am, so that you can share again.
I'll do a sharing again.
Yes.
All right. Hold on. Where am I? Do summit session. No. Oh, here it is. All right. So let's try again, Mel.
And then screen share, ma'am.
Yeah, I already shared screening. So I'm just going to go now into where I am. All right. So this is the last one. So the next slide, Mel. I'm already in control. Thank you very much.
Okay, ma'am.
All right. So let's do, I'm sorry. Let's do the poll. Mel, can I just ask everyone to react to this, and Mel will take a poll, and let's see how you feel. After COVID-19, it's already there. Okay. How long would it take for your business or the sector where you come from to return to normal, whether you with NLRC, POA, etc.? And it says more than 6 months, 3 to 6 months, 1 to 3 months, less than a month.
We'll have a minute, ma'am.
Go ahead. Let's wait for it. And I already would look at this because the answers are quite revealing. No more? It's not moving anymore. Okay, go ahead. Kindly answer it fast so that I can proceed. We had a long session before this. Okay, let me cut this short. There were 54% of the audience who responded. All right, but that's a hefty number. It's about 82. So 63% said that it's more than 6 months. 20% said 3 to 6 months. 1 to 3 months was 13%. And less than a month, oh my God, you must belong to another planet. It's 4%. What does this mean? 6 out of 10 actually feel that it will take more than 6 months to get what we call as normal. All right. So when you do this, okay, let me now share with you. Okay. Uh, um, okay. In a report or in a survey that was conducted globally, okay, what they found out was this: more than 97% of those surveyed think it would take within 6 months to return to normal. And there's a reason for that. It was also like the Philippines before, that in the first 3 or 6 months of the COVID, we thought we could return to normal. However, if you will notice your responses given today and all these things that we've read and or your own experience, many of you are saying no. However, it would take more than 6 months. So 6 out of 10. So this is how the level of pessimism, optimism is now being changed. And earlier you asked Dr. Kwe to do a mental audit. Perhaps the first question you should ask would be, how do your people feel about the next uh, 6 to 12 months? How much pessimism is there? Well, let me now go into the learning session flow today and the key messages I'd like to leave with you. The challenge of the VUCA world to the world of work, there are deep disruptions. It requires transformation, not just the tweaking of the relationship. The second notion is that the pandemic, deep disruptions, and what he calls, Dr. Kwe would call it disruption management and short-term responses. The ecosystem is moving way beyond our country already. The global supply chains are already dictating how fast is the speed of that disruption. And third, I'd like to focus on the role of the tipsies and the partners in setting the new agenda. And this time, I'd like to call it not the new normal, but it is a better normal. The Department of Labor and its partners cannot be happy with the new normal. It will kill what we call the margins of our people. What we will need to do is to work towards the better normal. And the better normal is beyond any one sector's might and power. And power will lie in collaboration. So what does VUCA mean? Let me do a fast one on you. Oh my God, it came already at the end of the 20th century. And it did not come from business. It came from the US War College into defense, because the United States at the time, while they were winning the war in the air, because they had prominent, very good equipment, they were losing, or they could not capture the ground. The communities would not support them. And so the term VUCA will come from the US Army War College. And here also in the military parlance, what did they finally find out? That the war is not between two countries. It's actually multilateral and global. And in that sense, the business world at AIM, this is what we had picked up, have started to call their own world, our own world, as VUCA. It is already global and multilateral rather than just bilateral. It cannot be labor and management already. And that's why I keep saying the labor code. Um, when I was secretary, we were already discussing how to change the code because we could see that it was already straining under the heaviness of the VUCA world. You cannot look at the world as labor and management, not at all anymore. It is no longer bilateral. So it's volatile. The challenge is unexpected. It's not necessarily hard to understand. I just don't know when it's going to happen. So when the Marawi siege happened, it was the volatility of that relationship. We knew it could happen, but we didn't know when. It is uncertain. So there's a lack of information, but we know what is the cause and effect. The change is possible, but it's not given. It is very complex. And this is the one that really haunts us about the pandemic. It is what? Too many parties, too many parts and variables. You have, but you can predict it, but you just can't have enough knowledge about it. Ambiguous is a terrible, the most terrible state because it's what we call the unknown of unknowns. And the relationships are completely unclear. You have ambiguous relationships today as a result of the pandemic. So the two things, and as Dr. Acque has pointed out, there are two variables. How well can you predict and how much do you know? Ambiguous, you cannot predict and you know very little. It's the complex that you know very much of, you can predict, but you don't know much of. The uncertain is you know much about it, but you cannot predict it. And of course, the volatile. This is the one that gets us when Wuhan in China decided the market to have a new virus. Well, you can now know what it means to have a virus, yeah? But you also do not know much about the situation. So please be careful. And of course, this is what the business sector, and I thought I'd just summarize it with you, is that some of the things I thought could be something you could focus on when you start working in your trade and your industry councils. Is please take note that one of the things that we need to do today is what we call the ecosystem. We need to think the big picture all the time. We're no longer in control. The other one is, yes, we want to have strategies, but they can no longer be long term. It is about risk management at its very best. So we need to be able to learn where the risks are coming up. The other one I thought I'd point to is this. We're no longer doing hierarchies. Okay, who is on top, who is below. Labor and management cannot be a hierarchy. It will be what? We will need to work in networks. And that's why the tripartite, in the industry councils, you will have to see yourselves at networks rather than hierarchies. And the last one is industry keeps saying, get used to being uncomfortable. It will be quite a long time before you do it. And like before, a good vision is what we have. So I'd like to focus on some of the things that we would like to have. Usually I'd ask people to say, so what's the difference between the three, among the three? Baking a cake, sending a rocket to the moon, and raising a child. So I'll answer it for you. I would have had time to do it for you. This is exciting because I usually get very funny answers here. Baking a cake and the three, sending a rocket to the moon and raising a child. There are two variables that you're looking at, the level of uncertainty and the level of agreement on what to do. Baking a cake, very low uncertainty. I mean, you put it in the oven, you use flour, use some, and you'll get the cake. There's also very good agreement on what to do with baking a cake. You won't have too many people jumping up and down, disagreeing with you. Complicated is like sending to the moon. Uh, when the Indian president, yeah, when the rocket fell down back to Earth without even reaching the moon, he says, "Oh, that's okay. Let's just call up our friends in the US or our friends in Russia to tell us what went wrong." So here the expertise is critical, but it is easy. It is manageable. The political is the hardest, and this I think you will have to embrace. The political is some of us do not like it, but remember this, the political is what gets things going. It moves it. So there's very little agreement in the political, but uncertainty is still um, not very high. It's raising a child that's very high in terms of uncertainty. No matter how good we are as parents, yeah, the child, we don't know how they will come out because they do have a mind of their own. There are many schools of thought about developing the child, as there are schools of thought on what to do with economic growth. But we don't know. It is the people who is going to be the one who's going to do it. The pandemic is what we call chaotic. Chaotic is part of what we call the equilibrium, the Nash equilibrium. And there are many things now, including climate, that has told us that it's more chaotic than complex. And when Haiyan came for the first time to the Philippines, yeah, this was a chaotic event. We did not think it could happen. So here we are, most of us in the councils, we work with each other, and all of us who are part of all of these old successful companies. We have patterns. We know what is the cause and effect. We know what strategies to have. The outcomes are predictable. However, the pandemic has taught us that it is no longer true. Okay, I was gonna give you, I'll skip this. And so today, many of us look at best practice, but best practice is only for simple like baking a cake. Okay, we look at it, we categorize, and we say, okay, let's do it. The next one is complicated, like sending a rocket to the moon. So we sense, we analyze, we respond. But that's only good practice now. So please don't talk about best practice because what was best practice yesterday can actually be the wrong thing to do today. And the third is called complex. We probe, yeah, we sense, then we respond. And for the complex, like the child and like the pandemic today, like the IATF, for example, it is what we call emergent practices. So in the last 7 months, we've had an IATF, we've had many prototypes, we call it, of responses, and we have to let go. Even the WHO had probed and they said no need for the face mask. And in 2 or 3 days, they turned around and said, no, 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 it's the face mask. And today, the face mask is key. So we call that emergent practice. And the last one, chaotic. Oh my God. Yeah, it's what we call new practice. And this is where I think many of us are going to be scared about. I think many of us have courage up to what we call the emergent practice. And so what we really want to do, and that's why you had a question to Dr. Kwe, is what kind of mental health program? And what was her answer? It depends. It depends on your culture. It depends on what your intent is, etc. So what we're looking at in terms of mental health are really emergent practices, not best practice, not even good. It is emergent. And that's why emergent practices will have to be discussed. They cannot be hidden, especially if they are unsuccessful. And today, where the IATF is today, is because we did know and realize what our failures were in the last 8 months. We have shifted gears. And in that vein, you know, our councils and our sectors will have to be as forgiving as our IATF and our citizens as well. So this is actually Haiyan. This is actually Tacloban. This is the beach. And all along, all the way, if you go to the top left, that is the center of town. And what you have here is really Haiyan came. And even President Aquino at that time, yeah, kept talking about the hard-headed citizens who didn't want to go to the evacuation centers, etc. And so they finally did. And all our pag-asa kept saying, oh, the storm surge. So the pandemic also, coronavirus, these are all scientific terms. They're new terms. And at the time, yes, what happened was many people went to the stadium. They said 8,000 people died, but that's an understatement. All right, those are the things that were counted. But about 5,000 people died in a stadium, an evacuation center. And the reason for that is yes, they raced to the evacuation center. However, those evacuation centers are only good for 2-meter surges, 2-meter flooding. And the storm surge of Haiyan was 8 meters. And so today, that Haiyan should have warned us of the magnitude of the disruption, that it isn't within our control. And also stop applying the old solutions to the new. Secretary Coloma says, even if those living in Leyte and Samar have experienced with typhoons, this was really the first time they experienced a storm surge, which could have been explained as a tsunami. That could have been one lesson. We could have said tsunami-like effect. Well, that's really an after the fact, because the people said, if you told us it was a tsunami, that is what we know. We would have run faster up the mountains, not to the evacuation center. And in that sense, what was our lesson? The new disruptions are going to bring a language of its own. And the arrogance of our scientists and our government people to keep what? Using storm surge. And according to our people then, to the ones who survived, we didn't know what a storm surge was. And our scientists said, well, we couldn't call it tsunami because it wasn't a tsunami. And that's why I opened my talk today is, are you sure that you are now about to use a language that best describes what is emerging in the labor, or what we call in the world of work? So is labor management relations the right term today? Or are we restricting the ability of our groups and sectors to look at a problem and solve it? So please, the language to me 20 years ago of the labor code was already faltering. And that's why we have many notions or many attempts to resolve it by department orders, etc. But I think it needs a little more disruptive mechanism. The other thing I thought you should watch out is that when the VUCA world is on us, and it is in us, and the pandemic is causing it to accelerate, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of risk aversion. There's a lot of, let's go back to the basics. There's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of analysis paralysis. There's a lot of decision paralysis. Oh, and we know this. There's a lot of what? Scapegoating. People are pointing fingers at what they think or who they think is causing all of this. So to my mind, yeah, your own behavior, and I wish the Region 11 would lead the community as well, is to dispel this and work at trust building. So the VUCA world is called volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The more optimistic guys will redo that VUCA world. They'll call it a code world, coding. What does it mean? It's colorful instead of volatile. It's opportunity rich instead of uncertain. It's very diverse rather than complex, and evolving rather than ambiguous. So be kinder to ourselves, please. And the code world, and focus on it, what we call building the resilience of our communities. Please take note, I use the word community. I did not say labor and management. That belongs to another century. Okay, let me now get you stressed out. Okay? Let's look at your ecosystem. Uh-oh. 94%. These are pandemic numbers. This is the total share of workers residing in countries with workplace closures. They've already monitored. 17.3%, yeah, is what? The estimated total number of working hours lost in the second quarter of 2020, which is equivalent to 495 million full-term jobs that have been lost. 10.7% is a decline in global labor income, equivalent to $3.5 trillion or 5.5% of global GDP. For lower middle income countries like ours, this went all the way up to 15.1% of the global GDP, or the upper middle income countries at 10.1%. 68% of surveyed multi-stakeholders cited that the real biggest risk, this is the highest mentioned, was the prolonged recession of the global economy. And so many of them are really seeing this happening. 13.6%, the youth unemployment rate is higher than any of the groups at 267 billion. Today, what people are being warned about is that we will have a lost generation who will face permanent exclusion from the labor market, sidelined by lack of opportunity for their skills, damaging what we call the post-COVID world. Please take note, because we have an academic industry tripartite council. This 13.6% is global. But what it means is that we are looking at what we call a lost generation, even in Region 11. And to watch it, you don't really want 13.6. The next set of numbers I thought you might want to play with is 17.7%. Is the unemployment rate at the record high in the Philippines at the second quarter. That doesn't look like our unemployment rate. We've always been using 3, 4, and 5. And then in Region 11, it was 17.9%, above the national average. And what is more critical is when SUWS asked people how they felt, this notion of joblessness was actually at 45%. So the statistical authority will now use their definitions, but in terms of perception, 4 out of 10 had actually felt that they had lost a job. 6%. What is 6%? This 6% is the equivalent, of the GDP Philippine response, and one of the smallest in the ASEAN. We spent for fiscal stimuli only 6% of our GDP, and we were only followed by Brunei, Myanmar, and Laos. All the other countries in the ASEAN is going to had already provided for bigger percentages. 70.6%, or 7 out of 10 Philippine MSMEs were forced to temporarily close by second quarter. And in July, 15% had already permanently closed. 200,000 plus is the report of the Dole. Migrants returned to the country as of quarter two. Please take note that, to my mind, this is quite a small number. We have not also seen where the migrants have done. But compare it to India, who did, during that period, facilitated 1.3 million returned workers, because India is the largest of country with migrant workers. For the World Bank, there was, during that period, globally, a 20% drop of remittances. So you can imagine how the remittances would have dropped. This one, I think, is something that our BPO council should look at. And this is really post-COVID. 90% of the new jobs from call centers in the Philippines are now under high threat from automation. No longer just call centers. You'll have to bring it up. And that's equivalent to 1 million jobs, accounting for 6% of our GDP. Elsewhere, they also sounded the threats for, in Thailand, the shrimp peeling industry, which are all being manned by Myanmar migrants, or the garment factories in Bangladesh and Indonesia. Right now, that 90% is something that we need to watch out for. The other one I want to stress you out on, but please note that there have been better numbers, is that GDP in quarter two was at 16.5% decline. And then the forecast for the fourth quarter is that what? While Taiwan, China, South Korea, and Vietnam benefited from the global trade, they also see that the Philippines is going to trail way behind. And that is why Malaysia is ahead and all the others. So please be a little more in terms of cognizant of what the major forces are. Please also note that the 70% of temporary closures of firms in April also said that there are three areas, and this is now your tourism industrial council, is what? Arts and entertainment had one of the biggest, tourism and transportation. Actually, education and food services are also going to follow next. So in terms of monitoring the environment in which you're about to operate and make decisions, you will need to look at what is this. So the temporary closures have what? Have bottomed out? Not yet. Not yet. But please note the disruption of supply chains continue to plague most of the firms' closure. The average Filipino's income dropped to 2015 levels. Okay? And according to a study made, wherever in a scenario where everyone is on the receiving end of a 10% decrease in their income, the number of poor Filipinos can increase by 5.5 million. And I suspect, Director Ofal, you should be getting your people to start moving on the Region 11 data. What is really hard, and earlier I said, was that the fiscal stimulus package that we had put together was one of the smallest in the region, called the ASEAN, 6%, when actually you would have Singapore, you would have Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand for that matter, Vietnam for that matter, Timor-Leste for that matter, and Cambodia, providing a bigger amount of their GDP and focusing it on their stimulus package. So the economists have actually slashed their 2020 outlook for the Philippines. And the slash is more than any other Southeast Asian nation. They thought we would perform better. The GDP forecast for the end of this year dropped from 6.1% growth in January. This was a forecast in 2020 January, to what? to a decline of 8.9% or 15% percentage points of a decline. Thailand was the second country, and Malaysia was the third in the ASEAN. So 78% in the World Economic Forum, for example, this year, early this year, said they were surveyed. They said 78% expect economic confrontations to increase in 2020. But take note, it is not the pandemic that they're scared about. It is climate change. Climate change is going to be the precursor of what we think we saw in the pandemic. So this is I thought I'd just share this with you. You will get the slides, but to show you, for example, that people were asked here globally, what were their fears? What are the risks that we are being faced with? And one is prolonged recession of the global economy. It is going to move that way. Two is the surge in bankruptcies and a wave of industry consolidation, mergers, reconfigure. And therefore, the Industry Tripartite Council should be aware of what was going to happen with their industry. The third one is cyber attacks and data fraud. Okay? And the fourth is failure of industries or sectors in certain countries to properly recover. Then the protracted disruption of global supply chains. And for my POEA guys and the DOLE, tighter restrictions on cross-border movement of people and goods. And it was only the last item that another global outbreak of COVID-19, yeah, only 3 out of 10 had actually cited this. So let me now go into the VUCA world in search of the better normal. So I thought that, yes, we should strengthen our labor management relations. But that to me, labor management, when you say that, is the world only of the workplace itself. And today that workplace has changed. So the first one I thought that I'd like to point out, let me just move my, okay. The complexity or the VUCA-ness of all of these will require significant collaboration, infrastructure of the different sectors. So labor plus employers plus government, and not just those, but the whole of government. Oh, but the local government is required now, plus civil society and communities. So this is the traditional tripartite, yeah? This is the traditional world of the 20th century. This was a world where it was the export economy. But the globalized economy will not look like this anymore. So it is a what? It is from a me economy. This is our world. We need to move to a we economy because the complexity says that no one sector can actually understand what's going on. And so if you'll notice, you still have the 3 circles, but this time the circles are dotted, are dashed. And the reason for this is what? You can no longer stay in that circle. You will be influenced. And therefore, for the workers group, I thought I would list down what is the worker in a wage employment? Is wage employment the only employment? What about the young workers? What are you facing? Most of the young workers today are not keen to join unions. The fourth industrial revolution has a different relationship structure from the first industrial revolution, which generated, and the second one, which generated the biggest and the toughest labor unions because we had to fight the oppressive conditions. So notions of minimum wage, I mean, these are notions that date back to the first and second, right? What about the teleworkers? How do you value? What about workers in MSMEs and the workers in the informal economy? What about the vulnerable areas called women, migrants, informal? And today they said, what do you tenure. This is now the age of what we call the contract employment. And today, labor unions will have to redo themselves. They'll have to look at cooperatives. They'll have to look at other associations. And the last item is international solidarity. The only way you can get a global supply chains and to talk to them is to enter into international solidarity, as well as government will have to look at their international solidarity in order that we get better agreements from our host countries, but also in terms of access to funds. The employers, my God, what are they? They're now large firms, but they belong to global supply chains. SMEs, they may be small, but they can be connected already to the global local supply chain. And when you say a supply chain that's global, the notion of control is difficult. The micro enterprises, we need to support them. What about public sector employment? Okay. Then we now talk about employer cooperatives, chambers of commerce, but there are other associations that are now being formed. Then, of course, global solidarity. What about government? Oh, my dole, the dole that I love. Yeah, sorry, but the dole has to be a very strong advocate in the cabinet. It has to be a strong advocate for the people it serves, is because a lot of decisions are now being made in terms of allocation of resource. Yeah, you're now on your third bill, on the third fiscal package, and where are the workers? Yeah, in that package. The access to international solidarity and funds will have to be also government. If there's anything about the pandemic, what it's calling for is a stronger government. It's a stronger government only because the workers and employers are now, or the communities are reconfiguring themselves. And that is why, in a sense, yeah, it's a whole of government. You cannot talk, for example, of DNR closing down without talking to DOLE and to DOT and DTI. The discussions and collaborations are there already. But the fourth circle is the communities. And this, in a sense, is what we're saying. You will need to work with local governments. Is because if you want to reach the community, you are not going to be able to do it with just the dole. The dole is only up to the not regional but provincial office. It doesn't have a reach. And the lesson of the public employment office is telling us how to do it. I told you the dole is such a crazy department. It started many innovations way before its time. So when the Public Employment Office was only with the dole, it was not very successful because it only grew as a matter of how the dole grew, which was what? Up to regional office and very few provincial field offices. And so when it became local government, now when we started to get the local government to get assisted, when the local governments understood what it meant to have a public employment office, then the political accelerated the work of the public employment office. So the dole should not be jealous. As a matter of fact, the dole should be an enabler because the local governments will want to serve their people. And that is our interest, isn't it? And so we need to, what I call, restructure the infrastructure of relationships. And this time you will have to be enabling. The second one is, and this is a promise of our government, is we will want to maintain the right balance and sequence of health and economic and social policy interventions. But the question I have, and many others, is where is the voice of work? in negotiating that balance. When you talk about the margins, and let's say who gets the vaccine first, we talk about the old people, we talk about the military, we talk about the frontliners. Is anyone talking about how do you re-energize the workplace? How do you get our workplaces to be producing again? And in a sense, many of the bigger firms have already said they will, on their own, the private sector, take on the vaccine. And we understand from some of our discussions with some companies, it is the global office, their head office, that's now looking at this. May I also inform you that in some companies globally, global companies who have operations here in the country, one or two big ones have already said that by January, they do not see themselves opening their offices at all. So please take note. Perhaps this is something you need to monitor. So does the fiscal stimulus package embrace the rebuilding of the workplace and drive sustainable growth? Is there health protection for the vulnerable in addition to CCT? You may give 5,000. Mayor Abby of Makati is doing that for everybody. But that 5,000 will not last for 9 months, 8 months. So that will, in the higher economies, they not only have bigger amounts for stimulus packages, but they're already working with very, very high health protection. Can you get PhilHealth? Yeah, to focus on consulta. This is their health protection, universal health care. Can that be speeded up? Not the fraud investigation, let that be handled. But right now, it is not only the cash transfers that you also need the health protection, right? Whether it's COVID related or not. So the question to my mind is, are there wrong priorities? Or are there wrong priorities because we don't have a voice? The work voice has to become very, very strong. We need to push policies, yeah? But this time, that won't address health problems, but will address what? Health protection. I mean, there are infrastructures. What about build, build, build? That's a lot of jobs that will be generated. So that kind of conversation is you don't hear it very well. And I don't hear, and we don't hear our labor parties, meaning employer, workers, group, etc. They will need to have a stronger voice. My third proposal for a better normal is that in the turbulence of the VUCA, we need to bring new services as well as bring the service closer to the citizens. They will not come to us. We will go to them. And that is why, one, we need to be more intimate with the people we serve. Okay, greater intimacy for sharp targeting. I asked Mel and the Institute of Labor Studies for data, and I noticed that you will need more data for sharp targeting. And I suspect the industry councils, you will need more data. Learn more about the people you serve, learn more about what's going on, and you will need to generate it. And that will be the basis for targeting. Number two is you need greater intimacy for trust building. And that intimacy, I said, you are powerful. The industry tripartite councils is one way of generating intimacy with the people we serve, with the people, the regulators, with also the global companies that now affect us. We will need new partners. If you want to bring services closer to our citizens, we will need to partner. We will need to partner with companies. We will need to partner with cooperatives. We will need to partner with the new emerging associations in the future. A fourth item I thought that I would like to endorse to you is that yes, vision clarity is now required. As a matter of fact, vision clarity, I mean, more organizations now are going into refining and sharpening the vision because the pandemic has a way of making you what? Lose self-confidence, lose self-esteem. It's a way of cutting off your legs. On the other hand, now more than ever, is vision clarity is required. Why? The better normal will require this, that the GDP growth must be inclusive. And then two, because you're the only one who's going to say this, is what? It must address, target vulnerable segments, the women and informal economy, the low-wage workers, the migrants. Those voices will have to be louder. So I thought I'd just give you the story of Leia Abla Aninyao, grade 7 teacher, okay? The woman in the midst of the pandemic. She now not only have be a mother, she's also what washing the clothes. Plus she's watching because she has to also now help out her children with their lessons as well. And so today, women are 1.8 times more likely to lose employment in the pandemic. And they have. The women, yeah, are account for 39% of global employment, but they accounted for 54% of all overall job losses in the pandemic. So here we have, right, a notion of, I asked for this data and I said, no, you can't wait for the PSA or the Statistical Authority to give you data on this. You must be able to monitor what is happening in the different sectors of how the women are being brought out faster than the men. And there's a reason for that. There is a study that was done globally. They said there are three ways of doing it. One, you don't do anything, just allow COVID-19. Two is you wait to take action. You delay the action on gender parity, we call it. And the third is take action right now. Start your programs. And they said that one, if you do nothing, it means a negative $1 trillion loss. If you do something but you wait, it means an $8 trillion gain. And if you start right now, yeah, and become the best in the region in terms of your programs, yeah, for women, then you're talking of a $13 trillion gain in a year. So the prospects really, and I thought I'd share this with you, is because the pandemic is going to make us paralyzed and wait for the others to move and tell government because government is not doing anything, all right? On the other hand, we can work now. All right. The other vulnerable sector is the informal. And if you don't work on the informal, the new normal is going to have a lot of the informal economy. It will not be less. And so my question to you is the informal economy outside your concern and action of the tripartite councils? What's your agenda? Does your agenda for the next 24 months take on the informal or the shadow economy that accompanies your industry? And therefore, yeah, universal health care, insurance schemes, yeah, microfinance with microinsurance, all of these, yeah, will be required. And therefore, and this is where I'm going to start putting you on, is really you cannot not make your agenda you cannot make your agenda blind to this informal sector is because this is now the hierarchy of what? Of the informal employment. You will notice at the top is that what? The employers. These are the ones which government wants to tax. Then at the second level is informal wage workers. So there is wage employment in the informal employment. Then what we have, the open account operators. Oh, how do you now term the Grab persons, the Grab drivers? Are they employed by Grab? No, Grab is a platform. What is the relationship? What is employment? What is right wage? What is a termination? And so at the lowest level, however, the home workers and unpaid family workers, these are the ones who are the most oppressed in the informal employment sector. And in terms of gender, again, the employers at the top of the pyramid, you will have predominantly men, I'm sorry, and predominantly women are the ones at the bottom of this pyramid. So in this sense, how do you now look at employment? Labor income losses are on the increase. And when I was asking for some data on this, there was none. It's perhaps something that the regional office and the national office should now start to monitor. But globally, its labor incomes have gone down. And when you talk about that, it's very scary because when labor income loses, then you now push households into poverty. Then there is a fall in demand when there are no savings. And when there is a fall in demand, you have an expanded fall in demand or fall in the number of enterprises as well. So more income losses are registered, job recovery is more difficult, and what you have is an unmitigated cycle. And that is why the question I had about emergency employment or what is the fiscal stimuli package, you will need to target this very well, is because you need to stop the cycle from getting vicious. Is because it will be harder to get away from it when it becomes deeper and deeper. Number 5 is the labor. When I say labor, Department of Labor, as well as employers and owners, investors, as well as workers and workers' organizations, must have a larger voice, stronger voice in the fiscal stimulus package. The third bayanihan has already finally talked about outright support for MSMEs. On the other hand, we are still the lowest. And so why do you need a fiscal stimulus package? You cannot let consumption fall. We're a consumption economy, and that's going to mean business closures if it falls. Then a fall in further investment. And finally, the need for increasing direct government expenditure on social services, including healthcare. So this fiscal stimulus package, you will have to be heard, and also at the regional level as well. Please take note, just this slide, just to let you know that really after Bayanihan 1 and 2, it is very small compared to the losses we had. Okay? Arise Philippines threatens to be a bigger one, but we don't know yet because it has to be approved. The third is the Industry Tripartite Council. We need to construct new platforms of engagement across sectors, across gender, across age, across income class, for the voices to be heard. And so, can the industrial peace councils transform themselves into such platforms? You will need to, or else you will be set aside, because the pandemic and the VUCA world will set you aside, will make you meaningless. The labor code has to be changed, or else it will become meaningless as well. I said yes at once to OFL, to this invitation to the summit. It's the first virtual summit. And as we said, You need to have so many other summits as well, faster and more frequent. Is because you need to bring new coalitions in, new parties into coalitions. You need to be creative in the organizing so that you can access the vulnerable groups. Can the councils, yeah, and it's a question I have for you, can the council generate this advocacy? But magnitude will require data and data analytics. So can the department, both Dole and DTI for that matter, since you're now joined anyway, can you generate data so that it helps out the council's focus on what needs to be done? And at the workplace, and this is what Dr. Kwe has been saying, you need to provide greater space for the worker voice in developing the new arrangements. You'll need, as she said, buy-in. And the first thing you do with buy-in is to engage. You've got to engage the workers, or else you will have more conflicts in the space. So this is our picture of social distancing. Let me now move into something that is very close to you and to me. There is a changing landscape of benefits. When the work from home is now not only a perk, but it is now a right. So there was a survey that was done globally. And when that survey was done, they asked the people, what the employees wanted is not what they want now. When it comes to benefits, 74% of employees want internet connectivity, and 41% want collaboration tools, including the Zoom platform. All right. So you will notice that we keep saying, oh, let's make them, do remote and connect them, etc. Have you run your survey to ask our people what they really want? Okay. And that now leads me to questions again. Is there now a new model of work emerging? So one question I have, what's a minimum wage for an WFH employee? How do you value the number of hours spent, utilization ratios, productivity ratios, manpower role to quantify this perk as salary or compensation? Number two, how does a leave policy work in WFH or its hybrid? Will this mean a reduction of leaves for those in the WFH? Number three, should compensation now cover IT allowances, training for those who occupy positions and may not be terminated? Or can I move someone who refuses to have an IT training and demote her or him in the next reorganization? And the next question I have, what about more contracts and fewer careers? How are we going to handle this? So the call really is, would you spend time as a council to re-examine the conventional policies related to compensation and benefits, as well as the right of those who may organize? And for the young people, will they want to organize? When actually the studies have indicated that the young people of today are very purpose-driven, yeah, and think of themselves as more as individuals. So you have a different culture that's emerging under the fourth industrial revolution. I'm not even speaking about the pandemic. On the other hand, yeah, the conventional relationships is what we need today in terms of not the way it's structured, but the kind of pressure and the kind of voice that they had generated before. Oppression today is a different nature. And that's why my fourth proposal to you is, yes, this is so unpopular, but please review the labor code. Labor policy must be part of a total social policy. It must even be part of the financial policy. So, one, will you allow for the modernization of the workplace? Number two, when you do skills upgrade, can you recognize, renegotiate the value that's created and now needs to be claimed? And the third, yes, tenure is important, but given the volatility and the VUCA world, you are looking at employment that's more contracts based. And perhaps the question is not how to stop it, but how do you ensure that the state or government will come together, yeah, so that the quality of life of the worker and his family is now the better normal objective. The expansion, yeah, under the COVID-19 is that what? You will have actually a question of lifetime commitment. And that is why when you say 60 is the retirement age or 65 is the retirement age, really? Is that the debate today? Or it's more a debate of what contract-based employment might be looked at in the next 24 months? And what is it that you can develop to ensure that both employer and worker are healthy? Healthy in many ways, not only in terms of financial or in terms of physical. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, actually, mali yung aking slide, sorry, is the role of the state in this new economy. Government has started to play a stronger role, and it will continue to do so. And that is why this, what I call, there must be a demand for government to build better. Do not accept, we should not accept our government for just doing what it can. It cannot. Okay, it must work in areas of climate change because it is coming, and Typhoon Ulysses told us how terrible it is and how we were not prepared for it. The other one is, yes, for those dramatic government interventions in the market sphere. Before, we said government and markets are separate. I'm sorry, today your market is now invaded by government. Government is now making decisions that's going to affect the market. So let me say this, when you say build, 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 that's exactly a dramatic government intervention that we would like to see in the market, but has a hard time trying to sail. Okay, so look at them. I mean, you are an industry tripartite council. The industry says that you need to look beyond labor management agreements. It cannot be done anymore. And let me warn you, everybody, it will take years for the state to unwind, even if it says it doesn't want to now intervene anymore. It will take years to unwind that intervention. So my hope, and that's why Secretary Bello knows this, and that's why he was looking for me earlier, is because he has had his own battles and debates. And it's very difficult to be a Secretary of Labor when the economy is not doing very well. Is because the advocacy, you will sound like already the NGOs and people in the streets almost, is because you will need to get trade and industry, finance, and even environment now to listen, because you will champion the workers and the employers as well, who will need champions in this particular conversation. So you have a choice. Do you now convert your tripartite councils into this collaboration platform? Number 5, COVID taught us, and this is the one message I want to do. COVID is making us, and the VUCA world is heightening the levels of distrust. And that is why I laugh. I laugh because if I were President Duterte, I will not be very thin-skinned. I mean, I'd like to tell him, sir, do not compare this to the previous administrations. Today, more than ever, yeah, the trust levels of our people are really being dissipated for many reasons. And government will never be able to answer all of them. And that is why we keep saying government has no recourse. And finally, to be humble, to ask for help. And it will ask for help from the people it says it wants to govern. So there are now what? Multiple poles of power. It's no longer just government, and government insisting that it does have it. So the conversation now is a very healthy conversation. Some of you may not like it. I like it. Yeah, is because each sector has to educate the others into what it thinks is what the future lies. Transparency and accountability are going to be asked of all of us, including employers. You will be asked for the transparency of your processes, decisions, etc. So watch out for this. And the number 6 is what? I think this is number 8, sorry. Is data, data, data. You cannot shift, yeah, the minds of others when you cannot show it graphically what it means. So we need to help each other make sense of what's happening. Different voices will need to be brought in, and data is what's going to bring it in. And today, really, risk management is really the work. It requires data across multiple sectors. And please take note, it is not anymore just the Philippine Statistical Authority. It is already what? It is each of the sectors, including the workers, generating that data. And number 6 as well, this is number 9, huh? Small businesses and entrepreneurship are the hidden assets of every democratic society. And therefore, yeah, I would love to see the DTI and the DOLE, also the bigger firms and the bigger workers' organizations mentoring the small businesses. They will have to be defended. And I suspect, yeah, I wanted to see, for example, if we have conditional cash transfers for individuals and workers, why couldn't a fund have been set aside that could do a cash transfer to small businesses and entrepreneurs who are going to defend their workers, who are going to make sure that they remain afloat? That, to my mind, also, we belong to the 20th century mind, is we miss out on very direct transfers to the small businesses. And also the future of access to capital for small businesses remains unclear. And the banks will not do it. As a matter of fact, between you and me, many banks actually pay the penalty because they did not reach the level of lending out to small businesses. So the law is very nice. It's making small businesses access the banks. But the banks also is very nice. All they do is it's cheaper to pay the penalty than having to service this section. I suspect you may wish to look into this, not because you will be the bank, but because the industry tripartite councils are potent, are very powerful councils, are very powerful platforms for some of these things to happen. And the last one, my number 7, is what? In the end, and this is my hat from being ILO and all, worked with ILO for a long time. I disagreed with ILO for a long time on some issues, but here I will agree. Last June of last year, 2019, ILO Convention 190 was passed by the Assembly, and it was respect at work, the rebuilding for a fair, safe, and healthy workplace as well as economy. The new normal cannot be just the new normal. It has to be the better normal. And so here is a call, and you can, in a sense, do global solidarity with this. The convention, we have not approved it yet. We have not ratified it yet. It's too soon, is what it calls for rebuilding our economy, where we proactively design and implement systems that empower and protect workers and address what we call the systemic power imbalances. The new normal, the better normal, will need to reconfigure the power structures, and we don't want to have the 20th century power structure. So using this, yeah, using this ILO convention, I suspect you might want to look at it and see what else we can do in terms of pushing it. At the national level, you may have a hard time entering, but at the regional level, this may be something that you can work with. So in conclusion, this is the last slide. Finally, you can have lunch. Is my main message is go for the we. Tayo, tayo. The Industrial Peace Councils were created many, many decades ago to face a particular ecosystem of an export economy, a rising conflict. But today we are in a globalized economy. We're also in an economy where we're looking at environment. We're looking at resilience. We are also in an economy that says do good, not bad. So there are signs in the economy that says it can be done. But a different global system needs to arise. So can councils now transform themselves by convening the parties, more than the tripartite, to review the emerging patterns and see if the rules of the labor code, as it was passed, the spirit is still there, but the rules have changed and will need to change. If these are enough, the conflicts are going to be terrible because because of the labor code. Is there a way of engaging so that we can embrace the better normal? Social dialogue, not just cases and inspections report, is the next level of intervention. And therefore, when you do your metrics for the dole, for example, you may want to add social dialogue as clearly equal to number of cases filed or number of inspections done, is because the dialogue is going to be the main instrument for engagement and creating the world after the pandemic. So data, data, data. So with that, let me thank you. Daghang salamat. And let me thank you again for this particular invitation. And in a sense, Ophel knows me, Director Ophel knows me a lot. And it's always been since 20 years ago, my advocacy has been change the rules, please. The world is getting out from our nurturing. The world has to be nurtured. So it's not an issue anymore of labor versus management. You talk of adversarial, that's no longer part of the discussion in the 21st century of the VUCA world. The VUCA world talks about the we, the engaging of multiple parties. And so thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was very happy to see Secretary Bellio. I keep praying for him. Okay. And also to see also how active your councils are. But I think those councils, you can actually be potentially powerful platforms for engagement. So thank you very much. Let me do it there. Okay, thanks.
Again, thank you, Professor Nieves, no, for that inspiring presentation